Eastern meditative or contemplative practices have long been outside the purview of science. In the past decade, however, there's been a tremendous growth of research into the effects of these practices on mental and brain health. Joining us now for more on the continental drift of science and the Western mind towards Eastern practices, in New York, there's Dan Harris, ABC News correspondent and the author of 10% Happier: How I Tamed the Voice in My Head, Reduced Stress Without Losing My Edge, and Found Self-Help That Actually Works. A true story. Also in New York City, Stanford University health psychologist Kelly McGonigal. She's also the author of The Upside of Stress. And with us here in studio, Jeff Warren, writer, meditation teacher, and founder of Consciousness Explorers Club, and Maria Gonzalez, president of Argonauta Strategic Alliances Consulting, Inc., and author of Mindful Leadership. And it's great to welcome everybody to our studio here in Toronto and in New York City. Good to have you two down there as well. We're going to spend a few minutes with Dan off the top just to sort of set the table for the discussion to come. And Dan, I want to start by playing this clip that you have described as the worst moment of your life. And no, I'm not talking about your bar mitzvah video. I'm talking about you anchoring on ABC. Here we go. Roll the clip, please.
I am about to freak out on national television. Health news now. One of the world's most commonly prescribed medications may be providing a big bonus. Researchers report people who take cholesterol-lowering drugs called statins for at least 5 years may also lower their risk for cancer. But it's too early to prescribe statins slowly for cancer production. At this point, I realize I'm helpless, so I bail right in the middle. That does it for news. We're going to go back now to Robin and Charlie.
You know, I got to say, for the most humiliating moment of your life, that really wasn't all that bad. But maybe you can tell us, Dan, what was going on at that moment?
It's funny you say that because I usually get one of two reactions to that clip. If you've ever had just the tiniest taste of panic, those who have, they see that in that video and they know exactly what they're looking at. A lot of other people say exactly what you just said, which is, wasn't that bad. It really doesn't matter because my internal experience is all that matters, and it was terrible. My heart was racing, my mind was racing, my palms were sweating, my lungs seized up. I just couldn't breathe. You can see it there. I have to kind of quit in the middle, and it was extremely embarrassing.
Do you know why it happened?
I do know why it happened. It took me a little while to discover it, but I went to a shrink actually after having a second on-air panic attack, and the shrink asked me a bunch of questions, one of which was, do you do drugs? To which I sheepishly said, yeah, I do. And he leaned back in his chair and gave me a look that communicated the sentiment of, okay, moron, mystery solved. And just to quickly give you the backstory here is I had spent a lot of time as a combat reporter in the years after 9/11, and when I came home, I got depressed and mindlessly self-medicated with recreational drugs, including cocaine and ecstasy. And the doctor explained that it was enough, even though my drug use was reasonably sporadic, it was enough to raise the level of adrenaline in my brain and prime me to have that freak out.
Well, that may explain why you were considering calling your book something else. From what I hear, you were considering calling it The Voice in My Head is an A-hole, except not a-hole, the real word. Why were you considering that?
Well, you had me really happy for a second. I was thinking, like, can we swear on Canadian television? That would have been awesome. This whole interview, the complexion of it would have changed.
Well, you can, but I can't.
I can? Really? All right.
You can, but I can't.
You may regret saying that. Okay. Why did I consider naming it that? I would have loved to have named it that. Because I think it speaks to the basic truth of the human situation, which is we have this voice in our heads. And most of us are unaware of this nonstop conversation we're having with ourselves. And because of that lack of awareness, it yanks us around, this ego and this little voice in our heads. And it's why you find yourself with your hand in the fridge when you're not hungry, or you're sending emails while you're supposed to be having a conversation with your child, or you're losing your temper when it's strategically unwise. And this voice in the head theory, which I didn't hear until after my panic attack, explained why I did things like go to war zones without thinking about the psychological consequences, come home and was insufficiently self-aware to know that I was even depressed, and then blindly self-medicated with recreational drugs. And I think on levels larger and smaller, we're all doing that all the time.
Your state of mind today compared to when you had that panic attack, how would you describe the difference?
Well, to blatantly plug my book, there's a reason why I use the title 10% Happier, because I subsequent to that panic attack and through a long, windy series of other circumstances, ended up finding meditation. And I don't think it's a panacea. And I think, in fact, we've been ill-served by the self-help subculture in the Western world that peddles these, magic cures. I don't think such things exist. However, meditation is, when used correctly, a really nice antidote to the voice in the head. And that's what mindfulness is. It's the opposite of mindlessness. And so while I continue to be deeply flawed on lots of levels, and if my wife were here, she would give you the 90% still a moron speech. I think I've gotten a lot better at resisting some of my more negative urges and impulse.
And you are 10% happier, you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I made that up. It's a joke. And now I'm going to be stuck with math jokes the rest of my life. It's impossible to quantify this. And but now that I'm out here with this figure, I will say that I do think the 10% compounds annually. I think over time I've found that the psychologists talk about this idea of a happiness set point, that good things happen to us, we tend to revert back to our set point eventually. Bad things happen, same thing. I found that the top end of that graph has gotten higher because I'm actually enjoying good things while they're happening and not thinking about what the next thing's going to be. And then the lower end, bad things happen, and I'm better able to knock myself out of ruts of useless rumination. And then overall, the happiness set point has kind of gone up. So for a guy who's terrible at math, that's my sort of geometrical description of my happiness situation.
Good. Well, thank you for setting up the discussion to come now, and let's congratulate you on the fact that you have made this achievement. And let's also go on to mention the fact that mindfulness seems to be all over the place these days, in the halls of Google, other Fortune 500 companies. It is in the military. It is on the cover of Time magazine. This is quite the hot topic. And of course, the offices of mental health practitioners around the Western world. And Maria, let's get into this. Mindfulness, your best definition of what you think we're talking about tonight.
Quite simply, and it's easier to say than to do, but quite simply, it is to be present and aware moment by moment, regardless of circumstance.
Kelly, how is mindfulness different than, say, going for a walk or taking a drive in the car to clear your mind?
How is mindfulness different than going for a walk to clear your mind? Wow. Very different. The definition of mindfulness that I like to use is actually even a little bit broader, that it's applying that quality of attention, present moment attention, to what matters most to you and making sure that you're acting in a way that's consistent with those values and those intentions. And we cultivate that quality of being able to be in the present moment so that we're aware of how our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions are either reflecting or contradicting those values and those goals. So in a way, the idea that mindfulness is a way to relax or blow off steam or reduce stress, which I think is kind of fundamentally incompatible with what the process that we're actually talking about.
Okay. Jeff, in a way, if you're not mindful, this may be a hard concept to understand. In some respects, it's like trying to describe what red is to somebody who's blind. How do you do that? So how do you describe mindfulness to somebody who's just not on that plane?
I think a lot of people can relate to the experience of being sort of on automatic. So you're doing the classic one is the highway driving. You're cruising along in a car, and you sort of shake your head and realize that for the past 20 kilometers or 20 minutes, who's been driving? You haven't even really been present. So human attention, you can be externally directed, you can be in your own thoughts, it can be any number of places. So I think part of being mindful is just being clear about where it is you're placing your attention. And I think people can relate to that piece.
Maria, you meditate?
I do.
How many hours do you think you've done so far?
Over 12,000.
12,000 hours of meditation through the course of your life?
25 years.
25 years, okay. Do you think as a result of that you experience the world differently from people who don't meditate?
No question.
How so?
Moment by moment, there's an awareness of what is going on. So that if, for instance, something is said that gets your back up, or a circumstance that you consider to be stressful arises, I experience an awareness of that. I know what's taking me away from this moment, if there is a tug away from this moment. I also know moment by moment, as I listen and sit and watch, the experience of knowing what is said and not said. So intuitively, You become much more aware. You become much more sensitive to other people's awkwardness or their discomfort. In addition to that, there's just a far greater joy in life because every moment is a good moment. It doesn't mean that every moment is a pleasant moment, but every moment is a good moment.
I wonder if, including this moment, some people, when they're on television, are nervous. Are you nervous right now?
I'm not.
And is that because you meditate?
Well, I think it's in part because I've developed the skill of mindfulness. And so, and it is a trainable skill, absolutely a trainable skill. And that is just to be right here, right now. The other element of it is that the more you practice, the more you experience equanimity. And equanimity is just that term that says you go with the flow. Whatever is, is. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily happy with what is. It just means that you're not resisting what is.
Gotcha. Dan, another term I want to throw at you and have you tell us what it means. The monkey mind. What is that?
It's the opposite of mindfulness. And I actually don't, this is why I don't think it's hard to talk to people about mindfulness who haven't practiced it, because you're talking about the most intimate part of people's lives, which is the nonstop conversation they're having with themselves. The monkey mind, the mind that leaps around through a forest of urges and impulses and desires, constantly latching onto things that won't last, hurling itself from one hit of pleasant experience to the next, and yet never fully satisfied. As my meditation teacher, Joseph Goldstein, likes to point out, how many vacations, how many lattes, how many social encounters have you had in your life, and are you satisfied? Of course not. You're not. We're insatiable. And in this way, the pursuit of happiness, enshrined in America's founding documents, becomes the source of our unhappiness. And that's the monkey mind, the sort of constant static of discontent. And so mindfulness is just the awareness of this, of the contents of your consciousness, so that it doesn't yank you around. And I think that is universally attractive to anybody who is not in denial.
Kelly, Time magazine has called what we're experiencing right now a mindful revolution. And I wonder how you would characterize the impact that mindfulness has had on our understanding, for example, of an approach to mental illness, particularly anxiety or depression.
Yeah, I think one of the best things that mindfulness has contributed to our understanding of how to relieve suffering is it offers actually a radically different approach than what we're used to taking. Usually when you think of something like depression or anxiety, you think, how do I help someone get rid of the inner experiences that they are suffering from? The negative thoughts, the physical sensations of anxiety, and we might offer drugs, or we might try to tell people to argue with their own negative thoughts so that they can somehow change those thoughts. And what mindfulness says is actually, if you change your relationship to those inner experiences, you can get relief from suffering without having to suppress or push away those symptoms. And this approach of basically accepting the fact that sadness is present, or physical pain, or anxiety, or pounding heart, that's part of your experience, to accept it and allow yourself to feel that in the moment somehow radically transforms our own strength and ability to tolerate those experiences. And so mindfulness has become a very important treatment for everything from addiction to post-traumatic stress disorder. And it does it in a way that is pretty much the opposite of how most people think about relieving suffering.
And Kelly, let me do a follow-up with you, because we mentioned off the top the increasing Eastern influence in all of what we're talking about tonight. So Buddhism and mindfulness, is there a connection there?
A lot of the way that mindfulness is taught and researched in the West comes from a Buddhist influence, where mindfulness is one of the qualities that you try to cultivate in order to be a better person in the world. It's one of many qualities that we might want to cultivate. And I think that in the West, people have latched on to different aspects of mindfulness and not necessarily always kind of delivered the full package. And in some ways, the West has forgotten, I think, some of the most important aspects of mindfulness that involve, say, action as a fundamental component of mindfulness. And I think that that's starting to reemerge, at least in the research that I'm involved in looking at what mindfulness has to offer.
Jeff, can you follow up on that, how mindfulness has made the move, if you like, from Eastern to the Western world now?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's super interesting. You had you had an interest in meditation in the West for, all throughout the 20th century, and it really, in the 60s and into the 70s, people were all about transcendental meditation, and there was actually tons of science research that was done then, and they had some interesting findings. And then what happened was, as all those mostly American teachers, but other European teachers that were out, went to Asia in the 60s, came back, they started bringing back all kinds of Buddhist practices in addition. So then they were teaching mindfulness at places like Spirit Rock and Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. And you have all the kind of a whole program of sort of soft Dharma type teachings around mindfulness. And that became really, really influential. And the way they positioned mindfulness was often to, they wanted to make it accessible, and they didn't want to emphasize sort of the weirder stuff that can potentially happen in a practice. So it really made its way out into the psychotherapy community, and now you're seeing it in the larger community. But, the thing is, it's a practice that can have quite profound effects on how you experience the world. It's all the things that everyone said are absolutely true. As you start to move deeper into a practice, you start to see the different emotional layers and cognitive layers that are kind of catching you up at different times. And you get many more insights besides that. But as you keep going, even more fundamental structures start to get sort of worked through. So I think now scientists are interested in some of these sort of deeper effects, and there's starting to be a conversation around it. But in the initial rush and blush of research around it, that wasn't talked about at all. So that's sort of, I think, where we are right now.
Maria, I didn't ask you the kind of meditation that you do. What kind is it? Is it TM?
No, it isn't. I started 25 years ago. I started with mindfulness, Vipassana meditation, and moved into Tibetan Vajrayana, studied Zen, and now working primarily with mindfulness in terms of training others working with mindfulness, because it's secular.
I infer from this heavily Eastern influenced.
Yes, but one of the things that we forget is that Christian mysticism has many similarities. And although when we talk about mindfulness, what we're really talking about is the origins in Buddhist practice, Christian mysticism has a great deal to teach us.
Let's talk about what recent neuroscience teaches us about the impact of meditation on the brain. Kelly, can I get you to start off on that? Meditation and the impact on the brain. What do we know now that we didn't know a decade or two ago?
I think one of the most interesting findings that come out of the latest neuroscience has to do with what Dan was describing as the monkey mind. That it seems like practicing mindfulness meditation creates an alternate state of mind to what psychologists call the default state, and we were talking about as the monkey mind. This state of mind that is so easy to fall into, where we judge everything as being somehow not quite right, including ourselves and other people. Sort of that negativity bias that pulls us out of the present moment, and also pulls us out of a sense that everything is okay. That's the default state of most human brains, and we walk around the world in that. And a number of researchers have found that people who practice mindfulness meditation, they're able to slip into a different default state of mind that is characterized more by sensing what's happening in the body, being in touch with their emotions, and being really attuned to what's happening in their environment, but without that kind of evaluation that says what's happening right now is fundamentally not okay. There's something not enough or not right. And research has shown that in addition to that being the outcome of long periods of meditation, even brand new meditators, when they learn a technique, you can see in their brains the shift from that evaluation mode of just things are not okay, to a state that where you can see the parts of the brain that are just paying attention to what's happening, they become more activated. And the sort of the negativity bias, you see those areas start to become less active.
So Dan, do you think through meditation you have actually, I guess this is the right word, rewired your brain?
Nobody's been able to take a look at my brain because I'm too claustrophobic to get in an fMRI machine, so I have no idea whether I've rewired my brain. And I think one of the interesting things is, while the science is incredibly important on 1,000 different levels, and in my world it's really important as a sort of a tool for evangelizing on behalf of this practice because it really speaks to skeptics. Nobody continues to meditate because they think their prefrontal cortex is getting thicker. People continue to meditate because they're less of an idiot. And they find that they're doing fewer stupid things, that their relationships are improving, that they're happier moment by moment. And so I'm a huge supporter of the science, but I think where the rubber hits the road with an individual is just your experience of your actual life.
So Maria, the science is more for the skeptics than for those who practice it, I presume.
It's really interesting when you start to talk with people about it. They're interested initially in the science because it's something they can comprehend. It's something that you can't actually see has now words around it. But when you start to practice, it becomes very clear, you know, as Dan is saying, it becomes very clear what the effect is. And that feeds off itself. And as a result, the more you practice, the more you experience it. And that's why it just becomes a habit. It becomes part of your life.
Ken, while you have the floor, can I get you to tell us about this 2012 study? This is Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. You guys were both part of this, weren't you?
Yeah.
You two here in Toronto? Yes. This is a group of so-called adept meditators participating in this experiment. What was it all about, Maria?
Well, they were looking to see what actually happens when you practice restful meditations that are focused on restful states. And so it was a matter of being in the fMRI for longer than I had originally anticipated, 3 hours and 10 minutes.
And you are not claustrophobic, so it was okay?
Well, you know what? In the first few minutes, it was touch and go. But after those couple of minutes, there's that sense of you're just there. And actually, coming out of it, after 3 hours and 10 minutes, it was one of the most relaxing experiences I have ever experienced. It was just absolute happiness walking out of there. Because think about it, you're practicing restful states for over 3 hours. And one of the fascinating things about that study is that one of the things we were instructed to do is between the actual techniques that you're practicing to allow your mind to wander. Well, anyone who's meditated a really long time knows that your mind does not wander. So how do you work with that? So that was an interesting aspect of the research itself.
Jeff, what did you take from it?
Yeah, that was partly it. It was very interesting because that was something the researchers didn't actually expect. That it actually goes to what Kelly was saying, that there's this normal default state of the brain where you're kind of neurotically going over the whole story of you. It's going around and around. But when you actually got some of the more experienced meditators in there, what they found was that sort of that activation wasn't happening at all. And actually they couldn't do, as instructed, just let their minds wander. They had to like deliberately try to make their minds wander. And this one fellow, I remember he was pouring sweat trying to make himself get back to that old way in which he used to be. So you really, for me, as a journalist who was there also as a participant, it really brought home to me that we're really talking about these significant changes happening in the way people experience consciousness. And there's one more piece as well, which I might say, and that is two of the most senior practitioners who were in that study, and actually Maria is one of them, they had something else happen. When they were in this, in the MRI or the fMRI, they had an experience of what you might call super rest or absolute rest, where they actually were sucked into, for what it felt like for them, they just disappeared sensorially. So it's like a little blink in consciousness, and they kind of, they're still there, but their awareness disappeared. So they call these cessations in Buddhism, at least some people talk about that as cessation. And that had never, the researchers were really surprised about this, and it had never ever been tracked on fMRI before. So maybe Maria could say something about what that was like from the inside, but it was very interesting to see from the outside as someone who was there as a journalist.
Maria?
Well, it'll be interesting over time when they can actually tell what happens to the brain during those periods. But essentially what happens is that all sensory experience ceases. And so you experience life as being out of time and space.
Altered states, if you like?
It's an altered state. But you know what? Any state is an altered state. Anxiety is an altered state. But this is a state where, in reality, there is nothing, there is no push, there's no pull. There's just a complete and total cessation of sensory experience. It's just a total, as Jeff puts it, absolute rest.
Dan, I want to get into some issues with you around ambition, because to get to the top of the greasy pole in journalism, as you have been trying to do throughout the course of your career, if I can sort of borrow that alternate title you thought about for a while, you do have to be a bit of an a-hole. You got to want to kind of claw your way, I would think, particularly in American network journalism. You got to claw your way up that pole at others' expense often. And, sometimes to do a tough interview, you've got to have a bit of, starch in your underwear, if I can put it that way. Do you worry about the fact that you may have lost some of that because you're now 10% happier?
Yeah, well, I add a lot of extra starch when I do the whites at home. I do. Do I think I've lost my edge? I think the truth is it's a bit of a myth that you need to be an a-hole in order to advance your career. I heard a nice little expression the other night from one of my favorite meditation teachers, Sharon Salzberg. She said, you can compete without being cruel. And I think that's true. I think that a certain amount of stress and striving and competition and plotting and planning is inherent in trying to be great at whatever you do. In my case, it's my career, but it can also be applied to parenting, volunteer work, whatever you're trying to do. There's going to be a certain amount of work that goes into it. But we tend to make our suffering worse than it needs to be. And so for me, mindfulness has been useful to help draw the line between what I call constructive anguish and useless rumination. And I think when you're doing less useless rumination, you're less focused on what Jeff called the sort of neurotic story of you, that makes you a little bit more open, a better listener, a little bit less emotionally reactive, more pleasant to be around. And those can be really nice, self-reinforcing, virtuous cycles. Because as it turns out, if you have better relationships, you're probably going to do better at work, et cetera, and you can get the people around you to root for you and help you. Anyway, I could go on and on about this, but I do think it is a bit of a myth.
Well, I hear you, but it's hard for me to imagine anybody in a network newsroom rooting for the other guy. It just feels like that's. But having said that, Kelly, can you talk to us about your view on whether or not you think that if you lose a bit of that ambition, or competing cruelly, if I can put it the way Sharon Salzberg did, whether there's a risk in that, or there's a reason to be concerned about that?
Yeah, I don't think there's a reason to be concerned. The research that I do at Stanford looks at both mindfulness and compassion meditation training. And if you think mindfulness has a reputation for making people soft, compassion, forget it. People think that is going to take you out of the race completely. And yet what the research seems to show is that, mindfulness and compassion are both traits and skills that make you better able to see things clearly, better able to read other people, better able to act in a skillful way. And those things often get us closer to what's most important to us. It might be harder to do things that are really inconsistent with your values, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to do things that are important, that you won't be able to be an effective leader. And I think that often what training in mindfulness and compassion does is it actually shifts your relationship to your own goals, so that you go from sort of the mindset where it's all about yourself to a kind of a bigger than self perspective that allows you to flourish as well as others to flourish. And it's a different route to what we might call success, but it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to be sidelined.
And just to hop on that a little bit, it doesn't mean that you become really dumb and let people push you around. It just means that you're not reacting, that there's a bit of a buffer between external stimuli and your blind reaction to them, that you can actually instead respond wisely to things. So yeah, I don't sit around wishing that every other journalist gets the interview that I want, or gets the assignment that I want, or gets the job that I want. But I don't also go into, I think, useless spirals of completely negative hatred or whatever. I realize that not every variable is in my control. I can do my best to get the assignment or the job or whatever that I'm shooting for, but I don't need to. That, in fact, getting caught up in dialogue around paranoid dialogue around how somebody's going to do X or Y to get this thing, blah blah blah. In fact, is a hindrance and not a help.
I bet you, though, Dan, there are people in that ABC newsroom who behind your back say things like, "There goes Dan, he's getting all Deepak Chopra on us, and I think he's lost his edge." Have you heard any of that?
I'm sure. I don't know what people are saying behind my back, but I can tell you that ABC News has adopted meditation in a really robust way. I'm not sure these names will be familiar to people in your audience, but major figures at my network like George Stephanopoulos and Robin Roberts, who are the two co-anchors of the #1 morning show in America, Good Morning America, are both meditators. The president of ABC News, the president of ABC Television, both meditators. We actually offer meditation courses within the news division now. So, and it's now, as you mentioned, being adopted in the halls of major corporations like Google, Aetna, Procter & Gamble, General Mills. Those are the people who make Hamburger Helper, and they have meditation rooms in every building on their corporate campus in Minnetonka, Minnesota. The U.S. Marines, the U.S. Army are doing it. Entertainers are doing it. 50 Cent That dude got shot 9 times. He's meditating, but I think he deserves a little peace of mind. So I think we've got some pretty decisive evidence that you can meditate and still be an effective competitor and an effective player in the world.
Just, I mean this with love, Dan. We're in touch, so you be in touch. We do watch ABC up here, just to let you know.
Excellent. Okay, good.
Jeff, so the concern that if we're all a bunch of blissed out Buddhas, nothing's going to get done, that's not a concern.
No, it's not a concern at all. I mean, meditation makes you more sane, basically. You're able to see what's happening in the present moment more clearly. You just have less reactivity. You're able to see things. I call there's like a Fonzarelli effect from meditation, and that's the equanimity piece that Maria was talking about, where you're less kind of like bracing and fighting against the world. You're just sort of more open. You let things happen, and because you let things happen, they move right through you. You can then respond more effectively and more efficiently.
Did you really just call that the Fonzarelli effect?
Fonzarelli
As
effect.
in Fonzie from Happy Days?
If I could slap the wall right now, the light switches would go out in here.
Have you got the Fonzarelli effect happening for you?
Occasionally.
Occasionally.
Yeah.
You stand in front of a mirror and go,
Well, I do the slap on the wall when I come into the meditations dojo.
Gotcha.
So.
Kelly, want to pick up on the title of your book, The Upside of Stress. How can stress be good for you?
So this book is actually the product of me realizing that I had taken the attitude of mindful acceptance and self-compassion to every possible unwanted experience except for stress. And I was teaching people to be mindful and self-compassion around physical pain, grief, depression, anxiety, cravings, and addiction. And somehow I had really become brainwashed by my training as a psychologist and in medicine that stress was somehow fundamentally so toxic that was the inner experience we needed to resist or avoid. And in the last 5 years or so, there's been a lot of research coming out showing that our relationship to stress actually influences whether or not that stress is harmful or actually enhancing, making us healthier, making us stronger, even making us happier. And I realized that, even when we talk about something like mindfulness-based stress reduction, we're telling people that their relationship to stress should be to push it down, to get rid of it, to reduce it, to suppress it. And what this book is really about is saying, okay, stress is another one of those inner experiences that the more you try to resist it, the worse it gets. The more you try not to have the panic attack, the more your heart pounds out of control and you think you're losing control and you can't handle the situation. And it turns out when you apply that quality of mindful acceptance and say, okay, this is energy in my body. This is somehow my body and my brain trying to give me energy to act, that we actually start to have a different physical response and a different emotional response to both our own stress and to the situations that challenge us.
I wonder though, Maria, and I ask this question with the knowledge that we are in the midst of the National Hockey League playoffs. With any luck, the Montreal Canadiens will be eliminated tonight. The world will be a happier place for some of us Leaf fans.
What do you mean?
No, I'm just. I wonder whether these principles are applicable for every workplace. On a Sunday, on an NFL field, in the middle of the NHL playoffs, the cruelty of competition may be a good thing. The stress, the undue stress of needing to win, in those circumstances may be a good thing. Are these examples where the power of Eastern influence in meditation and mindfulness may actually not be all that helpful?
I wouldn't agree, and I'll tell you why. When you practice mindfulness, the training of the mind, what you're able to do is you're able to actually slow the mind down. If you ever hear any of these superb athletes talk about what they experience when they're actually with the puck seems to move on its own. It actually goes into slow motion. They talk about these things, right? That's what they're talking about. These people are spontaneously going into meditative states, essentially. And what they're experiencing is just the notion of being right here, right now, to a point where they can stretch out time so that it goes beyond what we typically experience as time. And suddenly you see some of these maneuvers where how does that puck get into the net? We don't know. But really, they've been so present that they themselves have gotten out of the way. So no, I don't think that gets in the way of competition. It actually opens up opportunities that you would not have normally seen.
All right, with just a few minutes to go, let's put one more thing on the table. Jeff, let me get you on this first. You've written that mindful meditation can be used as a life skill or a transformative practice. Meaning what?
Mindfulness is a really valuable skill for, I think, almost anybody. So I teach mindfulness meditation. It helps people get more space around their reactions, get a little clearer about what's going on inside. But it's also a path, and it's a very serious path within Buddhism of beginning to really investigate what's happening in your experience. And as you go deeper and deeper into that path, it starts to make bigger changes. And that's what I mean. It's like you may not be prepared to go down the second piece, because although big shifts can happen, in particular around your sense of identity and fundamental pieces of who you are, it often means going through a challenging period, and something that people may not be willing to do if they're just looking for a little bit of, say, stress reduction, or to for time to slow down a bit and get better at their hockey game or whatever. So you have to, I think, be clear as you go into this. Am I interested in this just in this kind of a way, and it's sort of an applied mindfulness piece, which is perfectly legitimate, or do I really want to do this hardcore 3 months of meditation a year? Do I really want to go into the deep end of practice? Because if you're after the latter, there are going to be certain costs involved. You develop these expansions in sensitivity and openness. You're also expanding in your capacity to kind of be with what is, so you're kind of moving down. But sometimes you move out more quickly than you move down, in which you can be in these states of really high sensitivity, of emotional stuff coming up. And so it's just to, be informed about what you're looking for in a practice. And I think that there hasn't been enough of a conversation around that. Although we're starting to hear a lot more about it now. So.
Dan, based on your studies, what you know about this, your own personal experiences, is it possible to experience this kind of mindfulness, to do meditation, to transform your life the way you have, and yet still abuse drugs, still abuse alcohol, still be miserable to other people?
It depends how you define abuse. People have been using drugs and alcohol for millennia, and for all sorts of reasons that range from the negative, which is what I think you're talking about with abuse, but also for positive celebratory reasons, or for truly spiritual explorations. I'm thinking, for example, of either psilocybin, commonly known as magic mushrooms, or ayahuasca. Jeff has written a lot about both of these substances. But I think what you're really getting at is, can you be a practitioner of mindfulness and still be a jerk, or still engage in negative behavior? And I think the question is unquestionably yes. I don't think this is the path to immediate perfection. This is why what I was saying before about my wife joking about me being 90% still a moron. It's still firmly within my behavioral repertoire to be a schmuck. I think, however, I've gotten better at quicker apologies, because over time what I've realized is that doing bad things, saying the thing that's going to ruin the next 48 hours of my marriage or whatever, feels bad for me. It's kind of like poisonous, and that is the upside and downside of mindfulness. And so it kind of reminds me of a quote that I saw. I read Jeff's newsletter that he sends out to the members of the Consciousness Explorers Club. It's one of the things that makes me wish I lived in Toronto. And Jeff quoted Lincoln recently, who said, and I'm going to roughly paraphrase here, "When I do good things, I feel good. When I do bad things, I feel bad. That's my religion." And so for me, that's what I've found over time, the more I practice mindfulness.
That's a great place to leave it. Except maybe I should ask Kelly in our last 10 seconds. You've sat beside him for the last 40 minutes. Is he a schmuck, or is he okay?
I've had a great experience. I think he's maybe now like 12% happier.
Yes, as a result of sitting next to her.
Terrific. Dan Harris, the co-anchor of ABC's Nightline, the author of 10% Happier. Kelly McGonigal, Stanford psychologist, the author of Upside of Stress. Thanks so much to both of you two for being there in our New York studios for us. Maria Gonzalez from Toronto, author, Mindful Leadership. Jeff Warren here in Toronto, journalist, meditation teacher, author of The Head Trip. Great to have you up here in the Big Smoke as well.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.